Good evening. I'm just trying to sort out the Instagram to go live on Instagram. Here we are. Hopefully, I'm just about to be live on both Facebook and Instagram. Welcome, and it's lovely to be here this evening on actually what's rather a sultry evening. I'm very excited to be spending this evening talking about happiness in literature, which is a topic that many people have found quite intriguing. When you start thinking about it, do you look for happiness in literature in a conscious fashion, or is it something that comes to you through the process of reading? When I ask people about finding happiness in literature, I get lots of different answers about what makes them happy in the books that they read. Some people love to read books that are full of misery because that actually makes them feel comparatively much better off. Some people love redemptive fiction where people go through a lot of awful scenarios but ultimately come out on top. Other people love reading books that are very funny, and that's what makes them happy, and they're constantly looking for humour in their fiction. I'm going to be talking about all of these ideas in more depth, but I just thought I'd run through some of the main topics initially on what makes people happy in their literature and what they look for. Some people love reading childhood reads, books from their past, as a way of rediscovering happiness. They like to go back to books that they might have read when they were very young and find happiness through that. Other people enjoy reading books that are full of gardens, which I think is a whole literary genre in itself. Books that have beautiful areas of nature and gardens where they can escape to mentally. And yet other people like reading books where in their fiction the characters are the kind of characters who are always happy no matter what happens to them in the books. And that's a really interesting aspect of literature that I'd love to explore as well tonight. So thanks for joining me this evening. I'd love to know your favourite books. Which books are the ones that make you happy, and which are the ones that you turn to perhaps looking for happiness? I do have a little bit of a tickly throat tonight, and if I lose my voice, then I'm going to do some hula hooping while reading to fill in the blanks, just to demonstrate the joys of hula hooping and how that's a very happy thing that you can do while reading. So hopefully my voice is going to keep up with all this amazing happy literature, which I'm going to be sharing with you tonight. So welcome, Kirsty, great to see you. Welcome, Jessica. Lovely to have people here on both Facebook and Instagram. So I've just been running through a few of the themes of happiness in literature, but I now want to also think about the idea generally of whether reading in itself is an act that makes you happier. Cerrid Wyn Dovey is a really fantastic author who wrote a wonderful piece in The New Yorker in 2015, which was titled, "Can Reading Make You Happier?" And she wrote a lot about bibliotherapy and the joys of having a bibliotherapy session with me and my colleagues at the School of Life. But she wrote a lot of really interesting thoughts generally about the idea of whether reading itself can make you happier. And she said, and I quote her here, the insights which she got from the prescription that she was given by us are still nebulous, as learning gained through reading fiction often is, but therein lies its power. In a secular age, I suspect that reading fiction is one of the few remaining paths to transcendence. That's a great phrase, isn't it? That elusive state in which the distance between the self and the universe shrinks. Reading fiction makes me lose all sense of self. but at the same time makes me feel most uniquely myself. As Woolf, the most fervent of readers, that's Marianne Woolf, by the way, who wrote Proust and the Squid and also Reader Come Home, wrote, a book splits us into two parts as we read, for the state of reading consists in the complete elimination of the ego while promising perpetual union with another mind. So it's that perpetual union with another mind, which is a really wonderful and unique affair, which can't be repeated in any other form of art. And when you do achieve that union with another mind through reading, that is a state of transcendent bliss and happiness, no matter what you are reading. Though I would say that you only get that transcendent linkage when you're reading fiction. Kerry Dovey continues, in his 1905 essay on reading, Marcel Proust puts it nicely, with books there is no forced sociability. If we pass the evening with those friends, books, it's because we really want to. When we leave them, we do so with regret. And when we have left them, there are none of those thoughts that spoil friendship. What did they think of us? Did we make a mistake and say something tactless? Did they like us? Nor is there the anxiety of being forgotten because of displacement by someone else. So that's a great thought from Marcel Proust about reading, how when we read books, they are friends that we've chosen to spend an evening with. And therefore, books can be more of a happy companion than a real companion on some occasions. Not that I would advocate always turning to books instead of humans, but sometimes it can be a more happy scenario for a few hours. Colleen, great to see you. Lovely to have you on Facebook. And it's lovely seeing all these people joining on Instagram too. So tonight we're talking about happiness in literature. And don't forget that I'd love to know about your happy books. Which are the ones that you particularly love and turn to? I have had some people sending in comments, which I'm going to come to later. But anyone that's joining now, please do tell me, what books do you find are the happiest to read? So another thought about happy books is happy endings. Apparently, there was a poll done on World Book Day this year, and the poll discovered that apparently 42% of the nation likes to read happy endings of books, which is it's quite weird to start thinking about it in percentages. But I do think it's not completely irrelevant. Apparently, the most satisfying happy ending in a book is in Pride and Prejudice, where the two lovers go off galloping almost literally into the sunset. The second favourite is Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, which takes liberal attitudes to race and handicap, which is also a happy ending. Ollie, great to see you here this evening. Great to have you tonight. Ollie, I wonder which are your favourite happy books and where do you find happiness in literature? Do comment if you get a moment. Also, lots of readers, when they did this poll on World Book Day, said that they hate unhappy endings and they would actively prefer authors to change unhappy endings, and that they would, for instance, have Tess of the D'Urbervilles being rescued by Angel Clare from before she dies. Sorry to give spoilers to anyone that hasn't read that book yet. And also, we want Cathy to marry Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. We all wish that there were happy endings in novels, though apparently 2% of readers said they actively prefer sad endings. And it's also, according to this poll, been discovered that it tends to be younger people who prefer the sad endings. And the writer of the article who did the poll about on World Book Day about happy endings said that they felt that the younger people prefer the sad endings, partly because they've lived less life and seen fewer real sad endings in their real lives. So they're just better at coping with sad endings and think that they're more realistic. So that is all highly intriguing. Are any of you people that like happy endings, or do you prefer more realistic endings, or do you actually like ambiguous endings, which is also a large percentage of readers who claim to prefer ambiguous endings? So a few of the types of happiness in books I've been mentioning are books such as books where you find a happy sensibility. And one of the people who has most famously written books with a happy sensibility is Beverly Nichols, who is a really fabulous writer who goes into the category, I would also say, of books about gardens, because he wrote 6 different books about gardens, and quite a lot of people do love to go as their happy place to books about gardens, even people who are not gardeners, and that does include me because I'm not a great gardener by any means, but I did love excuse me, the Beverly Nichols books about gardens. He's written 2 trilogies about gardens. He wrote his first novel in 1920 and his last in 1982. And during his lifetime, he wrote more than 60 books. In addition to fiction, he also wrote plays, memoir, travel books, and autobiography. And he also wrote some really fantastic children's books, including The Tree That Sat Down, which is one of my favourite ever children's books, and The Stream That Stood Still, and The Mountain of Magic. There's something about the way that Beverly Nichols writes, which is incredibly charming. It's incredibly happy and upbeat and positive. He does actually write about a mansion that he is converting the garden to become something beautiful. So he happens to live in a place where there are beautiful lawns, there's orchards, there's mazes, there's follies. So he has a huge canvas at his fingertips to turn into a wonderful garden, which most of us sadly don't. But it's still incredibly enjoyable to read about that through someone else's eyes. And I'll just read you a few quotes from one of his memoirs about gardens, which is called Merry Hall. He says, "Well, I love geraniums, and anybody who does not love geraniums must obviously be a depraved and loathsome person," which I rather love as a concept. He also says, "For a garden is a mistress, and gardening is a blend of all the arts, and if it is not the death of me, sooner or later, I shall be much surprised." And just one more quote from the lovely Beverly Nichols, who I'm sure many of you have read. And if you haven't, you should definitely discover him because he is such a lovely writer. Not just about gardens, but about people. It's the way he writes about the people who populate his house and garden that makes his book so good. And they're definitely in a league with P.G. Wodehouse in terms of being incredibly funny as well. Let's find a little quote from him. "It makes me happy to think that not one single suggestion of our roses has ever been adopted. Needless to say, when the water garden was eventually made, she claimed that it was all her own idea, merely because of the gleam which she had seen out on the bare earth that desolate day in January. She even suggested that she should be photographed with it, stretching out her hands for a lily. But if our Rose is ever photographed with my pool, she will be well inside it, and she will be stretching out her hands for help." So that's Beverly Nichols, very funny man, and writing all about gardens for anyone that loves gardens, and also for anyone that would actually love a garden perhaps, but doesn't have one. Layla is joining us here on Facebook and saying that she read Noel Streatfeild books she reads Noel Streatfeild books that I've enjoyed since childhood when I want to feel happy or comforted, and funny, silly books like Red, White and Royal Blue when I want to feel cheered up. So that's great. It is true that a lot of people go back to their childhood reads as a way of finding comfort in their adult years. And for me, I do love to go back to Orlando the Marmalade Cat, which is a beautiful book. They're ridiculously large books for some reason. They're always published in this very big format, and they have really wonderful illustrations. They're very old-fashioned, and they describe very old-fashioned holidays by the sea. They take you right back to a time before we were born, when everything was very calm and quiet, and there were no phones, and it seemed to be a place of no stress. I also do love to read, similarly, I love going back to Tintin, because I used to read these when I was a child too. And I just love the illustrations. I think they are absolutely brilliant. There's something incredibly charming and clever about the way that they're drawn. They're so expressive. Even the typeface is somehow incredibly pleasing. And I really particularly enjoy the way that they have all these little stars up above people's faces whenever they're trying to express kind of surprise or shock or ridiculousness. I think they're so expressive, and they just totally make me laugh. So going back to Tintin is for me always something that makes me very happy. Is there anyone else out there who's a Tintin reader, I wonder? Then I'd also very much like to just dwell for a moment on the joys of The Inimitable Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. So many of my bibliotherapy clients mention that they love P.G. Wodehouse as a comfort read, a place to go, a place to make them laugh. And I think possibly P.G. Wodehouse is almost as frequently reread as Harry Potter, because so many people go back and reread the Jeeves and Wooster novels again and again. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of The Inimitable Jeeves, which is the first in the series, to give you a flavour of the writing if you've never had the joy of reading. Excuse me while I just have a little sip of water. The Inimitable Jeeves, Chapter 1, which is titled, Jeeves Exerts the Old Cerebellum. Morning, Jeeves, I said. Good morning, sir, said Jeeves. He put the good old cup of tea softly on the table by my bed, and I took a refreshing sip. Just right, as usual. Not too hot, not too sweet, not too weak, not too strong. Not too much milk, and not a drop spilled in the saucer. A most amazing cove, Jeeves. So dashed competent in every respect. I've said it before. Excuse me. And I'll say it again. I mean to say, take just one small instance. Every other valet I've ever had used to barge into my room in the morning while I was still asleep, causing much misery. But Jeeves seems to know when I'm awake, by a sort of telepathy. Excuse me. He always floats in with the cup exactly 2 minutes after I come to life. Makes a deuce of a lot of difference to a fellow's day. How's the weather, Jeeves? Exceptionally clement, sir. Anything in the papers? Some slight friction threatening in the Balkans, sir. Otherwise, nothing. I'm just going to have a reading break for a minute and have a lozenge, which I think might help the old throat. But hopefully I will recover my voice shortly. Layla is commenting. Thanks, Layla. I love a happy ending, but I hate a trite or lazy ending. Just saying. And then these two characters finally get married. The end isn't an ending I enjoy. I very much agree. I think a happy ending has to be earned, and it can't be trite, otherwise it's too off-putting and unsatisfying. So, Layla, that's a good point, because writing happy books isn't easy, I really think. It's something that is a definite art. And one of the things that actually made me start thinking about this topic of happiness in literature, meaning happy people in literature, not just being happy through reading, was this book, A Happy Man by Hans-Georg Schertenlieb, which is a Swiss novel all about a happy man. And it is actually a really brilliant read, and it does take the premise of a man who is a happy man, and it takes him through a day in his life with a few flashbacks and describing how he first met his wife and how he's a musician, how his wife is a potter, and various other incidents in the past. But the idea is that he is a happy man, and the book is really all about the happiness of his day. And the question that you ask yourself as you read the book is this an interesting book to read? It does actually have a big drama in it, which I won't reveal because I don't want to give it away. It's a very short book, as you can see, and it is a really great read. I'm going to attempt, with my annoying throat, to read you just a little section of it. And if I have to stop, then I'll do some hula hooping instead, which is always fun. So just getting the candle so I can see a bit better. This is near the beginning of the book, describing his wife. In a moment, she was asleep again. He pressed his face against her hair and inhaled the smell he loved more than anything else in the world. Sometimes it was in his nose, even when he was far away from her. Smells have no name, so we got to resort to comparisons to describe them. That's why we don't forget them, why our sense of smell is the best custodian of our memories. Daniela's hair smelled of vanilla and summer, even in the spring, when the rain poured down for days and a cold wind swept the last snow from the sidewalks. The bunk wasn't just narrow, it was short too, and his feet touched the cool window pane. Every story has a beginning of a love story every story has a beginning, of course, but we remember the beginning of a love story with particular pleasure and clarity, don't we? On the permeable border between exhilarated weariness and sleepy excitement, this Studer, his first name is this, which is a bit confusing for the English readers, this Studer saw himself once again entering the pottery studio in Bhutan. He's 28 and playing 3 gigs in the Engadine with his band, Torso. They've already played in Sils and Pontesina. Tonight they're appearing in Skull. From the paintings of Flemish masters, we know the light that fills a potter's studio, fox brown, golden, a light from when the world began. For a business trying to sell things, it's surprisingly dark in this vaulted room. Nevertheless, the bowls, tureens, cups and plates standing on the shelves of unfinished wood shine so intensely he's compelled to touch them. Their colours and glazes are extraordinary. Even he can see that, though he knows nothing about the business of a potter. One particular cup, the colour of a summer sky in the morning, is so delicate that he is surprised he can't see right through it. It is made of nothingness, contains nothing. Is it even permitted to drink from it? And what would you drink? Air? Light? Isn't it made to play music instead? Inaudible music. He's got to have it. He doesn't notice the young woman sitting at a little table in the corner until she clears her throat. This is the most beautiful cup I've ever seen. I've made ones even more beautiful than that. And there we go. I do think it's a really beautiful book, which actually does pay reading many times, because every time I read it, I find more wonder in it. It's all about art, music, and happiness. And I think that is a book which does prove that you can write about happy people and make it an enjoyable book. There are also books, apart from the ones that are about redemption, like the shipping news, where the main character Quoyle goes through a huge series of agonies and pains, but is redeemed in the end, which is a different kind of happiness in reading. There are also the kind of books about the actual search for happiness. And one of my favourites in that genre is The Guide by Rk Narian, which is a very spiritual book about a man who starts off as a tourist guide. So his job in India, in a fictional part of India called Kerala, is that right? Having a blank. Anyway, his job is to take people on the trains, and he guides them on the trains. But as the book progresses, he goes through many different kinds of job and profession. He works as a manager for his wife, who's a dancer. He is a kind of thief for a while. And he ends up as a very different kind of spiritual guide. It's a bit like reading Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. It's a kind of spiritual quest and journey. And I won't tell you the end, but it's a really excellent book. And in a way, it is about the quest for happiness. And another one in that genre is The History of Mr. Polly by H.G. Wells, which is one of my favourite Victorian novels. It's very short, and it's all about Mr. Polly, who starts off the book as a very unhappy man who has permanent indigestion, maybe partly because he's always eating pickled onions given him by his wife. And he decides that he's living in a beastly, horrible hole, and he decides to leave his home, and he ups and leaves without telling anyone, let alone his pickled onion giving wife. And off he goes into the sunset, and he goes in search of happiness, and he has many adventures. It's all set in southern England in the summer, and he sleeps in ditches, goes through various different labour in order to earn a living, and eventually does find happiness with a lovely woman who lives on a farm. And it's a really great story, another kind of quest. And I think some of those books where people go through various vicissitudes and go in search of happiness are some of the ones which are most delightful and joyous to read and help you as a reader to find happiness through the process. Bill is mentioning Cold Comfort Farm. Thanks for that. That is a fantastic book. And I would also agree that it is, in a strange way, a very happy book. And I think that's because it's so funny. I think it's one of those ones that really does make you laugh. And that's another point that I was going to make, is that when you think about happiness in books, you don't often think of particularly happy scenes within the book. You tend to think of the book as a whole as a book that would make you happy, because it's the experience of reading the entire novel that is important. It's the fact that you spend your time living with those characters for maybe days or weeks or hours, or if it's an audiobook, it might be for a long car journey. And it's that experience of going through the various trajectories of the lives of the characters that gives you a sense of catharsis and a sense of arriving at a happy place at the end of the book. Tracy, great to see you. Lovely that you're joining us tonight from Florida. Tracy, do you have any particular books that you go to find happiness? Are there any books that really make you feel happy? And is it actually the act of reading that makes you happy, or is it particular types of books? I'd love to know your thoughts on that, because I know that you are a big reader. So that was thinking about books that take you on a trajectory towards happiness. But there's another type of book, which is the kind of book which is about making the best of things and being happy despite potentially living a not necessarily idyllic life. And there's a few fantastic books in that genre. So books that are about being happy despite what life throws at you. So one of those, I feel, you may disagree, is The Darling Buds of May by H.E. Bates, which is a really lovely book, the first of 5 novellas, really, written in the 1950s, which are all about the Larkin family, Pop Larkin and Ma Larkin, who live on a farm, and they live quite a outlaw kind of life. They're always trying to get away with not paying tax, with making ends meet. Pop Larkin uses a Rolls Royce that he's battered and broken into submission as his gate to keep the cows out of his field. And they encourage, Ma and Pop Larkin encourage their daughter to seduce the taxman who is trying to make them pay tax, in the hope that the taxman will let them off. Luckily, the daughter actually falls in love with the taxman, so it all works out for the best. But those are books which I used to read in my teens, and I really clearly remember debating with my boyfriend at the time about the idyllicness of their life, because I read the books as if they were in fact having an idyllic life. I felt that they were, because they live on this gorgeous farm, they're surrounded by animals, they're always having feasts, they're always drinking beer, they're always kissing each other or other random people. It's all very bucolic and lovely and idyllic. But my boyfriend at the time, who also read the books, was saying, no, 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 you're completely wrong. They actually have quite a difficult and challenging life, but they are determined to make the best of it, which is a really interesting idea, which I then revisited later on as an adult and realized that he was perhaps right, that their life actually might be quite challenging and difficult, but it's their attitude to their life of being incredibly positive and saying that everything is perfect. Pop's favorite word is perfect. Everything is perfect. When other people would not think that it's perfect, because they would probably be seeing the bugs in the milk churn, and the threat of having to pay tax could completely ruin their lives. But the Larkins are always remarkably positive about these things. And there's many a character in literature who takes the same attitude, such as, I'm now going to talk about The Little Princess, A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett, one of my favourite children's books, which is all about the imagination, overcoming difficulties with your imagination. But before I go on to that, I just want to look at Layla's comment, who says, Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day, lovely book that I love, and Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, both just came to mind as happy books for me. Maybe I enjoy when someone with low expectations gets themselves an incongruously exciting, charming experience that elevates them beyond the everyday, and that they really relish. That's a really good point, and I do love those kinds of books where people are having a banal seeming existence, and then they're taken onto a new adventure. And Layla's also just mentioning The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which I think, Tracy, you have also just read, or maybe you're about to read, which is an interesting read on the quest for happiness, or what makes a good life, which might be slightly different. Excellent. We're getting lots of really great thoughts and comments here. I wonder if anyone else watching tonight has read The Midnight Library, which is a kind of a book about the quest for happiness, which gives the protagonist, without giving too much away, the opportunity to perhaps relive their life going in different directions, taking some of the paths not taken, and deciding whether it would have been better to go in one of those directions rather than the directions that they actually did go in real life. Tracy is now just commenting to my question about what are the kind of books that make her happy. And Tracy says, I think what makes me feel happy isn't actually the subject matter or type of book. If I find a book absorbing and interesting, I tend to want to talk about it. When I feel excited about a book I'm reading and I want to discuss it, that's what actually makes me feel happy. That's really true. It's the fact that we can all join in and talk about books, uniting over the ideas within the book, that is a really happy experience. And Tracy says, that being said, sometimes I'll read a book that's actually sad or somewhat twisted, and I'll feel happy because the book is so good. I know what you mean. And that is definitely another aspect of reading, that we sometimes love to read books which are rather twisted and dark, maybe because we're comparing our lives to those and realizing that we're actually better off and happier, but also because we're going through a very dramatic experience, which in itself is cathartic. Well, let's just go back to The Little Princess, which Ollie is agreeing is an absolutely fantastic book, and she and her daughter have both been loving it. The Little Princess is a great story. If you haven't read it, now is the time to do so, which is a book that never fails to make me happy. And it's all about a girl, Sarah Crewe, who starts off as a very rich child who goes to school in Paris, and is very, very spoilt, and all the teachers in this school treat her like a princess. But then one day, she completely loses her fortune. Her father dies, and she's left destitute and penniless. And she realizes that she has absolutely nothing. Now, the joy of Sarah Crewe is that she is one of those people, rather like Anne of Green Gables, another great character in literature, who is determined to make the best of things. And she uses her imagination to conquer the sadness and misery that she might otherwise go through. I'm going to read you a little bit from A Little Princess, just to give you a little flavour of it. In Sarah's hungry eyes, the old light had begun to glow and transform her world for her. Here in the attic, with the cold night outside, with the afternoon in the sloppy streets barely past, with the memory of the awful unfed look in the beggar child's eyes not yet faded, this simple, cheerful thing had happened like a thing of magic. She caught her breath. Somehow, something always happens, she cries. Just before things get to the very worst. It's as if the magic did it. If I could only just remember that always. The worst thing never quite comes. She gave Becky a little cheerful shake. No, no, you mustn't cry, she said. We must make haste and set the table. Set the table, miss, said Becky, gazing round the room. What'll we set it with? Sarah looked around the attic too. There doesn't seem to be much, she said, half laughing. That moment she saw something and pounced upon it. It was Ermengarde's red shawl which lay upon the floor. Here's the shawl, she cried. I know she won't mind it. It will make such a nice red tablecloth. They pulled the old table forward and threw the shawl over it. Red is a wonderfully kind and comfortable colour. It began to make the room look furnished directly. How nice a red rug would look on the floor, exclaimed Sarah. We must pretend there is one. Her eyes swept the bare boards with a swift glance of admiration. The rug was laid down already. How soft and thick it is, she said with a little laugh, which Becky knew the meaning of, and she raised and set her foot down again delicately, as if she felt something under it. And so it goes on. It's a really lovely scene where Sarah is helping her friend Becky, who's equally poor and actually probably even more hungry and destitute than she is, to imagine and see beautiful, warm, cozy things around them. They have an imaginary fire, they have an imaginary feast. And then, of course, because it is a rather fabulous fairy tale kind of book, it begins to come true. And it's a very positive, upbeat and gorgeous, uplifting book, which definitely is full of magic. And it's a great one to read because you will always treasure it and remember that if you do use your imagination, then you can overcome the worst vicissitudes. I'm just seeing Layla's reply to Tracy thinking about the Midnight Library. So Tracy did read the Midnight Library and loved it, though she wasn't sure about the ending. And Layla says, I think any of us who loves reading feels happy when we come across something delightfully absorbing and interesting that makes us want to sneak away from other activities and gloriously devour the book. So true, Layla. Isn't that a wonderful feeling when we do want to escape into a book? There's nothing like it. That beautiful, cozy feeling of going into another world between the covers, which relates to the quote from Marcel Proust that I had at the beginning of this chat, that it's when two minds meet and become one that we completely feel a sense of euphoria and transcendence. So another book that a lot of people refer to when they think about happiness in literature is the inimitable and fabulous Winnie the Pooh, who some would say is the very epitome and archetype of a character in a book who is always able to be happy and who makes the best of all situations. Winnie the Pooh is a very treasured character who many of us love from our childhoods, and many of us continue to love and go back to again and again as we get older. And there's endless wisdom, joy and delight in the sayings of Winnie the Pooh. And even the pictures are absolutely gorgeous and irresistible and make you feel like you could float above a woods with the honeybees. Susan, lovely to see you tonight, says Pooh is the essence of love. And that is a really gorgeous thought. I agree. Winnie the Pooh is utterly in our hearts. And he does have all sorts of wonderful quotes, which are really great to return to, such as, a day without a friend is like a pot without a single drop of honey left inside. That's a lovely thought, isn't it? Another lovely quote from Winnie the Pooh. Sometimes if you stand on the bottom rail of a bridge and lean over to watch the river slipping slowly away beneath you, you will suddenly know everything there is to be known. I do love the fact that Winnie the Pooh makes you feel as if he contains all the wisdom of the universe in his thoughts and words and ideas. And I do think that one can keep returning to Pooh again and again for greater wisdom. Layla's now saying that she loved Little Princess, but she says it didn't make me feel happy at all. It's depressing for lots of that book. That's an interesting reaction, Layla. And I do know what you mean. It is sad. That is true in many parts. And I completely get what you're saying. I think, obviously, everyone is going to react to it differently. But I feel that for me, that take-home message from the book is the fact that you can look at things in a different light and turn something tragic into something positive. To be discussed further. It's interesting because it's a book that I always assumed everyone would love and feel happy when they read, but obviously not in your case. But you did say you loved it anyway, so that's a good thing. There's a couple more books that I would love to mention before time runs out. And one of them is Wally Soyinka's new book, Chronicles of the Happiest People on Earth, which is only just coming out in the UK. And it's a particularly interesting book because it's the first novel that Wally Soyinka has written in 50 years. And he is a Nobel laureate. He is an amazing writer. He's not necessarily the easiest read, but it is a book that's full of humour and satire, political comment, and also it does have an element of being a thriller. So the title, the Chronicles of the Happiest, Chronicles from the Happiest People on Earth, is definitely ironic, but I just thought that was one to mention because it's one that is definitely going to be a great one to read and reread, and which is new to us after 50 years of Wally Soyinka not writing any novels anyway. Oh yes, I also really want to mention to you Archie and Mojitobal, who is this is a book that I do quite often recommend to people because for me these are poems that you can find a lot of happiness in, very much because of the philosophy of the characters. So Archie and Mojitobal are a cockroach and a cat. Archie is the cockroach, and he lives in the office of a New York newspaper where he writes poetry using his head by jumping onto the keys using his head. And it's a typewriter, so he can't do the shift key, so he can't use punctuation. He has to write question mark or exclamation point, which actually makes these poems all the funnier. And Archie, it has the soul of the poet, and he is desperately trying to write down all his poetry, while Mojitobal, the cat, has the soul of Cleopatra. And it's Mojitobal who I particularly love because she's the one that always says that she will be toujours gay, always, always gay, always happy. And I'm going to read you just a little bit from Mojitobal because I do love her thoughts. This is from the poem called Cheerio, My Deario. And I'm actually starting halfway through the poem because the poems are fairly long. It was Cleopatra you used to be before you transmigrated into the carcass of a cat. Where do you get this Tutankhamun stuff? Question mark. I was several ladies, my little insect, says she. Being Cleopatra was only an incident in my career, and I was always getting the rough end of it, always being misunderstood by some straight-laced, prune-faced bunch of prissy-mouthed sisters of uncharity. The things that have been said about me, Archie! Exclamation point. And all simply because I was a live dame. The palaces I've been kicked out of in my time! Exclamation point. But what the hell, little Archie? What the hell? It's cheerio, my deario, that pulls a lady through! Exclamation point. Framed, Archie, always framed. That's the story of all my lives. No chance for a dame with the anvil, chorus. If she shows a little motion, it seems to me only yesterday that the Luxor local #1 of the Ladies' Acts Association got me in Dutch with King Tut, or King Tut, and he slipped me the sarcophagus. Always my luck. Yesterday an empress, and today too, emaciated to interest a vivisectionist. But toujours gay, Archie, toujours gay, and always a lady in spite of hell and transmigration. Once a queen, always a queen, Archie. Period. One of her feet was frozen, but on the other three she began to caper and dance, singing, "It's cheerio, my deario, that pulls a lady through." Her morals may have been mislaid somewhere in the centuries, boss, but I admire her spirit. Archie. I love Archie and Mojitobal. They always fill me with joy. They're so funny. And I do love that toujours gay attitude, which is a great one to embrace in times of trouble. Just to continue the discussion about A Little Princess, Tracy is commenting, "A Little Princess played into my worst fears as a child. I came from a well-to-do family and I had terrible fears about the possibility of my dad dying. Strange but true." That's really sad, Tracy. So it's all coming out now. Some of these stories, which I thought were clearly positive and upbeat, actually have some rather tragic underlying emotions. When I put the idea of happy books out there to the world, I got some great comments back, and somebody said Anna Green Gables is always one that they turn to in times of trouble, and I love Anna Green Gables too. Simon O'Hagan said Evelyn Waugh would have to be right up there in his list of happy books. Decline and Fall, Vile Bodies. I agree. I love Evil in War. He wouldn't be the person that I would think to look for happiness in books, but I do think he's an amazing writer. And clearly we all have different approaches to where we find happiness in reading. And Simon also said, I guess all books that make you laugh will also make you happy, but not all books that make you happy will make you laugh. Very true. And he also commented that Dickens makes one happy, surely. I actually agree. I do love Charles Dickens novels. And he said Iris Murdoch, A Word Child, is the book that he would turn to. For me, with Iris Murdoch, I would read The Green Knight, which is a book that I really love and is full of some rather fascinating moments. It has references to the Green Knight from the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight Arthurian legend, which are very much strong and important throughout the book. And Iris Murdoch does like to have references to old myths and legends in her work, but it also has moving stones which can be moved by the power of the mind. And it has these three sisters who are very important in the novel. They're the main protagonists, and they are semi-psychic and telepathic. And I love all of those elements. Somebody else that I asked what books make them happy said Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell, which is a book that I also love, but it, for me, is not a happy story at all. It's a love story. It's a bit of a Romeo and Juliet story between a Korean American boy and a white American girl. It's a really wonderful, great tale, but it's full of sad sexual abuse, basically. It's got quite a lot of trigger warnings in it, but it is a fantastic book, and it does have kind of a wonderful, slightly ambiguous ending. So Eleanor and Park, that's another one which came to light when I put it out to the world as a book that people love for happiness. Another one that I've recently been reading and which I think is a great read and makes you think about the nature of happiness is Jeanette Winterson's memoir, Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, which is all about her growing up gay in Northern England and her life as a writer and reader. And it's got a lot of wonderful thoughts about the joy of reading and the way that books took her into other worlds when she was a child, struggling through very difficult times. So Jeanette Winterson, Why Be Happy When You Could Be Normal, is a great read. A book that I would just like to mention as a final read, which I think nobody could find sad in any way, is The Young Visitors by Daisy Ashford, which was written in 1910 by a girl who was only 9 years old. And it is a really gorgeous book. I wonder if any of you have read it who's watching tonight. One of the big charms of the book, it has to be said, is all the spelling mistakes which are there throughout the book because she was only 9. But it's also the way that she observes the adults which make it such a wonderful read. And Daisy Ashford, writing this book when she was 9, apparently used to sit underneath the table of her parents' dining room, listening to the conversation and writing notes. And that's what made her think about writing this novel, which is a comedy of manners. It's subtitled Mr. Saltina's Plan. So The Young Visitors about visit ERS, Mr. Saltina's Plan. And Mr. Saltina is an old man of 40 who has decided that he wants to become a gentleman. And Daisy Ashford makes a lot of comments about people's legs because of the fact that she was always sitting underneath the table watching the adults and listening to their conversations and writing them down. So she's always very interesting about what people were wearing on their feet and how long or chubby their legs were. I'll read you a little bit of it to give you a flavour of this gorgeous book. It's called, this is chapter 2, Starting Gaily. When the great morning came, Mr. Saltina did not have an egg for his breakfast in case he should be sick on the journey. What top hat will you wear? Asked Ethel. I shall wear my best black and my white alpaca coat to keep off the dust and flies, replied Mr. Saltina. I shall put some red rouge on my face, that's R-U-G-E, said Ethel, because I am very pale, owing to the drains in this house. You will look very silly, said Mr. Saltina, with a dry laugh. Well, so will you, said Ethel in a snappy tone, and she ran out of the room with a very superior run, throwing out her legs behind her and her arms swinging in rhythm. By the way, Ethel is meant to be 17. Well, said the owner of the house, she has a most idiotic run. Presently, Ethel came back in her best hat and a lovely velvet coat of royal blue. Do I look nice in my get-up? She asked. Mr. Saltina surveyed her. You look rather rash, my dear. Your colours don't quite match your face, but never mind. I'm just going up to say goodbye to Rosalind, the housemaid. Well, don't be long, said Ethel. Mr. S. skipped upstairs to Rosalind's room. Goodbye, Rosalind, he said. I shall be back soon, and I hope I shall enjoy myself. I make no doubt of that, sir, said Rosalind with a blush, as Mr. Saltina silently put 2 and 6 on the dirty toilet cover. Take care of your bronchitis, said Mr. S. rather bashfully, and he hastily left the room, waving his hand carelessly to the housemaid. Come along, cried Ethel, powdering her nose in the hall. Let us get into the cab. Mr. Saltina did not care for powder, but he was an unselfish man, so he dashed into the cab. Sit down, said Ethel, as the cabman waved his whip. You're standing on my luggage. Well, I am paying for the cab, said Mr. S., so I might be allowed to put my feet where I like. And so on. I love The Young Visitors. You've really got to read it yourselves because it's a delightful read. And as I was saying earlier, it's the fact that there are so many spelling mistakes in the text that make it such a brilliant read. And it's really fun. I haven't had time to mention Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pierce, which is another great happy read, which is the sequel to Dear Mrs. Bird, which was a fantastic book that came out 2 years ago, set in the Second World War. It's a great story about coming together in times of hardship, and it has a real jolly hockey sticks kind of positivity, which makes it a really fun read. And it's all about female friendship, and that also makes it very joyous, which also reminds me of the fantastic Rachel Joyce's Miss Benson's Beetle, which is a book that made me incredibly happy because it's another great book about female friendship. It takes you on an adventure, and it's a book that leaves you feeling very much positive and uplifted. I'm going to end with a little moment of hula hooping, as I have been talking about that this evening, that it's always fun to hula hoop and read, and if ever you're feeling a little bit down, then try hula hooping and reading if you've got room. This is the moment where we're going to discover whether I've got room in here. Yes, I think I have. It's all coming together. So, next week on my Facebook Live, not Damian's, I'm just bending down a bit so I can see the Facebook people, I'm going to be interviewing Mal Gedroic about her new fantastic novel, The Best Things. So do join me for that next Wednesday evening on Ella Bear 2 Facebook Live and Instagram. And meanwhile, keep your eyes out on the Damian Barr Literary Salon Facebook page for forthcoming events. We've got lots of fantastic events coming up in the autumn, and you can join the mailing list if you go to the Damian Barr Literary Salon website. So Thank you very much for joining me tonight. And thanks for all your excellent comments. It's been really fun having you here this evening. And I've loved getting all your thoughts. Thank you, Layla and Tracy, for all your very interesting thoughts about The Little Princess, which is clearly a conversation that we should carry on having in the future. So I will see you next week, I hope, and I'll see you in a month's time also here on the Damian Barr Literary Salon page. Good night. See you soon. Have a great evening.